Coming to you live from City Current Studios in Germantown, Tennessee, it's Stephen Kirkpatrick with Executive Speakers on Speakers. I've got internationally renowned multimedia artist, author, and innovator Phil Hansen on the show with me today. We're going to talk about creativity, why embracing your limitations could be the quickest route to your creative breakthrough, and worms. Yes, we're going to talk about worms today. Stick around, it's going to be awesome. Hey everyone, I am so excited to have Phil Hansen on the show with me today. Phil is referred to by his fans as the artist for the people. He's an internationally recognized multimedia artist, speaker, author, and innovator at the forefront of bringing art to a wider audience. He crashes irreverently through conventional boundaries, works the intersection of traditional art, electronic media, offbeat materials, and interactive experiences. He's got a book coming out next year on creativity, and we are fired up to talk to him. Phil, why are you still living in Minneapolis? It's cold up there. Let's answer that question first.
Well, because then I have to stay inside and I get to keep making stuff. I don't have the excuse of, going outside and doing other things. So it's actually great for creativity and making stuff.
Look, I think he was ready for that answer, Andrew. I think he was ready. So,
well, I hate to say, but I've been asked that one before, Stephen. So let's up the bar a little bit here now.
Hey, seriously, it's my podcast. You can't make fun of me. I've told this to people before. It's like, it's my podcast. Like, you can't make fun of me, but I appreciate it.
Edit that out. Yes.
No, we can't do it. So, man, hey, Phil, I want to chat with you, starting off, with your TED Talk.
Yeah.
If people haven't seen it, it's got over 2.2 million views on Embracing the Shake. And I kind of want to give people some background on you and your story. And so why don't you kind of take us through kind of the first about a minute review of the Trimmer, how it started, and then kind of just where it left you after you realized you had this.
Yeah. So obviously lots of different facets here, but
sure.
The short version of that particular part of the story was I loved doing pointillism, which pointillism is a style of art that just uses dots. Mm-hmm. And of course, there's the big famous picture that we all know from Ferris Bueller's Day Off, the picture by Seurat, just made of millions and millions of tiny dots. And when you're close to it, all you see are the little tiny dots. And I just loved that style of art because I liked the experience of being close to a picture and just seeing the bits and pieces. But then when you back up, the whole picture, of course, comes into view. So I really liked that aspect of kind of two different experiences within a single artwork. And so I got really into pointillism. I just got completely fascinated with it. And as I got more and more into it, I liked working small scale. So I kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller pens as my skill set got better. But what I didn't know is that by essentially trying to get all these dots just perfectly placed, trying to hold the pen really, really steady and tight, I was actually very slowly over the course of years actually causing nerve damage in my drawing hand.
Interesting.
Because of course, all of our hands shake naturally, occasionally, right? Maybe, too much caffeine, lack of sleep, all those kinds of things, or just being too darn excited in the middle of the morning for a podcast. Yes. And so
I was about to say my hand is shaking like incredibly right now. Like you can see it. It's
and imagine trying to do very fine detailed art. It would be problematic. And so you end up essentially just holding the pen really tight. But then, as the doctor described to me, what happens is that when you essentially force your body to do something that it's not wanting to do, eventually what happened is my brain lost control of what steady is. And so my brain is just sending signal to my hand that is just constantly bouncing back and forth. It knows that steady is in there somewhere, but it doesn't know where it is anymore. And so as I was doing that pointillism, I was literally causing nerve damage that just now, of course, my hand shakes perpetually. And I went through this whole experience because, I was in art school when this happened and was happening. I was in high school and then in art school. And as it got worse in art school, I had a little moped that I rode because I couldn't afford a car. And it's so bad at a certain point where I couldn't even really squeeze the acceleration. And so I was even at different parts of my ride, I would actually drive with my left hand crossing over to the right handlebar to be able to do the acceleration. So it was really bad. And I dropped out of art school, but I still kept trying to do art. But I actually got to this point where I was only doing like 10 to 15 minutes of art a day. It was just awful, the pain, because it really, once you start to clench down that hard, you're even, causing joint problems. And so, I mean, it was even painful on top of the shaking. And so I ended up just completely, stopping doing art. And then that was about 3 years that I was away from art. And eventually I found my way back to the doctor's office and kind of got encouraged by a friend to pursue art. And the doctor diagnosed me with permanent nerve damage. So it actually took a number of years before I really realized what had happened, because I was young and trying to ignore the problem and just move on with life. But yeah, as I was sitting there at the doctor's office, I get the diagnosis, and I'm really kind of struggling in that moment, trying to figure out, what my life is going to look like. And then he said these few words that just had this massive long-term impact on my life. He kind of shrugged, and he's looking at me, and he's like, "Well, why don't you just embrace the shake? You're an artist. You can figure it out. You're the creative type."
Did you realize, you could literally trademark that term, embrace the shake? Did you realize what he was doing?
Good. Yeah, no, and because for him, he was a neurologist, so he was probably saying this to everyone, which is kind of the funniest part. Is for him, it was a very mundane moment, but for me, it changed my life. It took a while for that full mindset to settle in, but yeah, those words just transformed everything.
Yeah, that's interesting. So the 3 years you were away from art, how was that mentally for you? And I'm really curious, kind of in now looking at where you are, talking about creativity and the speeches you're doing. How do you frame those 3 years now, as far as just in your growth as a person, as an audience? Because if you kind of look over Phil Hansen's life, I guess you kind of call those the dark years. So I'm curious, kind of how you frame those, or your perspective on them now.
Yeah, so I guess I would tend to say that I'm generally a positive person.
Sure.
And so even though this was, looking back, the dark part where I was away from art, and I was very much lost, trying to figure out what I was going to do, what my future was going to look like. But I'm somebody who loves school, so I was just continuing to go to classes. I was in anthropology, psychology, all these different things, and I just absolutely loved it. And so I was continuing to school, but I had no idea what I was going to do anymore. And when you're one of the people who is very fortunate when you're a kid to actually have this sense of an idea of where you want to go with your life, because I feel like most of us, we have a couple ideas. We don't really know what job we really want to do. And I was actually one of those few kids who was able to kind of hold on to that dream and that idea of being an artist. I think there's a lot of people who have that goal and that idea, but of course, it fades and adjusts over time. And so I was very much in that adjusting phase. It's I still enjoyed many things in life and was trying to figure out what it was going to look like. So I was really just going on that youthful journey of trying to figure out where life is going.
Mm-hmm. Nice. That's a good way of looking at it. So talk to me about the TED Talk. Did you think it was going to be as big as it was, or did it just kind of come out of nowhere? How was that? How was the reception for you?
Well, actually, so I do have to pause there a moment and say that there's a whole backstory to how I ended up giving a TED Talk, because that's one of the great questions. How do you end up on the TED stage? If you want to hear that, I'm happy to kind of give you the quick background of that.
I thought it was like a Price is Right thing. It's you just showed up in line and they just kind of said hey, you look interesting. You do it. Obviously not. I was wrong.
You're wearing a funny hat. Yeah, here we go. Yeah, so, for most people, I think giving a TED Talk tends to be, here's an expert in the field. Here's somebody who wrote a book. Here's XYZ. There's some kind of a criteria coming in. But when I gave a TED Talk, there was no such criteria. And what they had actually done in 2012 is they decided they were going to do a worldwide talent search. They were going to just scour the world as they did in their own particular way of trying to find somebody and people who had never spoken on a stage before. So they did this literal worldwide talent search in 2012, and they had, I don't know how many thousands of applications, but they ended up selecting 300 people to actually go and give a 4-minute TED Talk. Mm-hmm. And those 4 minutes there were 30 different locations around the world. I got to go to New York and give a 4 minutes. And from there, they posted them online, but the only person who actually got the link to the video was the person who spoke. So I had the only link, and it was my job to essentially share it and try to get it out there in front of people. And then what TED was going to do is they were going to pick 12 people, maybe 20 people from these 300 and actually invite them to the main TED event to give a talk.
Yeah.
And I got super lucky, and my little 4-minute video went viral and had like 1.2 million views. And there was only, it was kind of funny. At one point, they said in the email saying this great congratulations to all the 300 speakers, because there was 1.7 million views total. And I'm over there kind of giggling and, of course, very proud with myself, because my video had 1.2 at that point. So I was like, I have a pretty good chance of going.
You basically put them on your back and was like, I'm going to get popularity myself. So
So then, of course, going and giving, a full, well, not full TED Talk, but it was an 8-minute TED Talk, or 8.5. I kind of stretched it a little bit. How I was going to be received, I had no idea, because, when an artist gets on the stage, and I think this is one of the interesting parts about, the speaking world, is that there's not very many artists that get on stage. No. And, artists just tend to kind of generally be introverts. Of course, I'm in the studio right now. I'm in a little tiny locked room all by myself. And that's where almost all of us artists would like to be. And so I had no idea, one, how I'd be received. I knew my art was interesting and weird. And so I knew I kind of had that going for me. So I knew at the very least I'd entertain people. But, when as an artist, the thing is that anytime I actually watch an artist give a talk on stage, they tend to just kind of, they tend to show a picture and talk about it, show another picture and talk about it. And that's the process. But anytime I talk to people about my story just one-on-one, of course, what I found is that, it was the story. It was that human experience. It wasn't so much about the art. And so it was kind of that moment of, it's not humility, I don't know what the word is, but where I just kind of had to sort of step back and say, you know what, as much as I'm an artist, I actually have to put my art in the background to be able to tell my personal story, this human experience of struggling and trying to figure out what to do with that struggle. So that was what I really hoped came across. And sure enough, I got lucky, as luck is a beautiful part of life. And that happened for me. And the TED Talk went kind of went a little crazy again. So it was nice.
Yeah. So here's the question on everyone's mind. What was your first job after art school?
After art school? Well, it's kind of...
come on, because you go to art school, and what does everyone say? Oh, how are you going to make money being in art school? So I'm curious what job you had in art school.
Well, so a little slight variation is I ended up dropping out of art school after about 2 quarters. So I completely abandoned art, and I actually never even had the goal of making a living from art, because I've seen and I've heard about too many people who basically can't make a living from their art. And so one, I imagined it was pretty much impossible. And then I did end up over the years running into a number of people who have made a living from their art. And what I find so fascinating is that they end up they're kind of in this weird position, because once you make a living from something, you have to keep that up. And so then your ability to explore, and this is one of my kind of slow realizations about creativity, is that in a certain sense, success kills creativity. And it really seems kind of weird, but what happens is that as you gain success kind of anywhere, but especially with art, if you have to sell it to make a living, well, then that means down the road, you're going to want to sell more art to make a living. Well, then you have to keep producing things that are sellable. So the ability to explore and kind of get outside of your wheelhouse kind of gets diminished. You almost have to make a special time for that exploration. And that was kind of an interesting realization. But yeah, for me, after art school, there wasn't even really a kind of after art school, because I ended up dropping out. So I did everything from working for this old guy, and he had some property, and I would mow lawns and just kind of take care of things, to working at Rite Aid. So kind of the usual route of that.
That's awesome. Yeah. Rite Aid. I worked at Rite Aid. That's awesome. I think it's interesting what you said about, being a successful artist and kind of putting there being a pressure there to recreate that success. And it's almost coming at the creative process from a backwards angle. I know you and I were laughing about some Saturday Night Live quotes before we got on air, but I think one of the things you hear about from Saturday Night Live writers is just the pressure to in a week's time come up with this material that's going to be funny, that's going to be well received, that's going to be able to go viral every week. And they're just like, it's one of those difficult things to do, because it's like you can't just sit there and produce this really great creative material whenever you've got a deadline and people breathing over your neck and networks and all that kind of stuff. So that's that's a very interesting perspective that you've got. And like you said, success kind of takes away creativity from you.
Well, and if I can inject there, as you're saying that, one thing I've always thought about, and I've never, until this moment, literally never quite had the connection to put it together. Brain chemistry is amazing in a certain sense, where you can have an idea at any moment, but sometimes the brain chemistry just hits perfectly. But I've always read that they tend to work nights. They tend to work overnight, of course, because, they work late on Saturday night. And one thing I've always noticed and always thought about is how in the middle of the night, your brain just gets kind of wonky and kind of tired, and you tend to come up with just the silliest ideas. And if, you and a friend are hanging out, that's when you're most likely to just get the giggles.
Right.
And I wonder, kind of a couple things with creativity, but one thing is that I've always believed is that we have to be able to come up with lots of ideas, we have to be able to essentially let our guard down from ourselves. We have to reduce what I kind of think of as like a mental filter of ideas, because, as adults in a world where we're being judged for what we put out into the world, we have to be able to have lots of creative ideas. You have to be able to essentially step back from yourself, not judge your own ideas, and let those ideas keep coming to the table. I think that's one of the most important parts with creativity is just that need and that desire to keep coming up with ideas. You really have to let the bad ideas come out, because that's where sometimes, the fun part is. And I wonder if that's part of the magic of SNL, is that they work overnights, maybe specifically just to be able to kind of get out of their own skin, let their bad ideas out, which are hilarious, which lead to other weird, funny moments, which then lead to amazing ideas that end up on the show. That's kind of funny. Huh.
Well, I'm glad I could inspire you today, Phil. That's what I'm here for.
I'm gonna jot that down. That's a good thing to remember.
There we go. You're welcome. You're welcome for being my guest.
If I'm struggling with ideas, stay up all night. It's gonna get weird. That's good stuff.
Yeah. Okay. So let's. I want to talk about this because I think this is fascinating. I think that there's whenever I was watching your TED Talk again before we got on air, this portion really jumped out to me because I think that there is such a tie to the business world. And obviously, being a keynote speaker, we're talking to a lot of businesses, but you talk about how by embracing your limitations, you can be more creative. You can, thinking inside the box instead of outside the box. I mean, I think that's a very just different way of looking at the term creativity and how to be creative. So, I mean, let's just kind of unpack that a little bit and just talk about, being creative with limitations and shifting how we believe limitations is affecting us.
Yeah, and I guess we have to go back and start at the beginning of kind of where did that perspective come from?
Right.
Because after only spending time with it, it's kind of you start to realize like, oh wait, I learned that from other people. I learned that we need more supplies, we need more materials, we need more people, and especially in business, that's where the idea is like, well, to be able to do this project, I need this budget, or I need a bigger budget, I need more people. We're always looking on the outside for more. Yet, where is creativity? Creativity is on the inside. And so whenever we look at kind of these big innovations that have happened in the world where, industries have been overturned, where somebody had an amazing idea, well, those things almost always, of course, are starting from the inside. There's somebody's perception, there's somebody's perseverance, there's somebody's, angle at viewing the challenge that's in front of them. It's actually not these external things. Yet, what do we do when we want to try to come up with a great idea and have people, kind of think outside the box? Well, we often push people to, get away from themselves and to get into this other place where at the end of the day, I kept finding and, still think today that the best ideas and where we really need our creativity is within the box, essentially, right? It's within the framework of our life, within the constraints of our lives. That's really where we need to allow ourselves to again, step back, give ourselves the freedom to go there, to think about the challenge that's in front of us, and to not kind of aim for the solution is on the outside, but we have the solutions. But it's really allowing ourselves, and of course at a company, you have to have the right team, you have to have the right people that will allow that freedom of exploration of ideas that have already been thought about 100 times before. Because that's the thing, is that we all work within small constraints at work, and we have to find a way to continuously reimagine what's in front of us and find that way to, again, have the same conversation, but hopefully arrive at a slightly different conclusion over and over and over. And all of that, going back to your question, all of that is within the box. That's not going outside and getting wild and crazy. Those ideas need to come from the inside. They need to come from your own expertise, your own ideas, your own developed perspective that have happened over the course of, months or even decades of being at a company. That's, as much as the people from the outside who are coming in for the first time can have kind of fresh, wild and crazy ideas, but that's because they're coming in with less filters. They're not adjusting their own ideas to the moment. And all of us, we have that opportunity to be able to step back and to give ourselves room to breathe. And that's really what we need. Again, getting back to, inside the box. That's where we want our creativity.
And it's fascinating. And I think it's one of the things where it's very empowering, I think, for individuals or organizations to hear that message, is realizing that, basically they already have the tools they need to be successful. They just need to either reframe the questions they're asking or reframe their perspective to kind of figure out how to make it work. So no, that's awesome stuff. Let's jump to the book really quick. Why write a book on creativity? Why do you feel like?
Because
I'm curious, not so much why do you see the need for there to be a book on creativity coming right now? That's probably a better question.
From me, even too, right? Because it's like that. I don't know. I feel like there's only so many stories or so many perspectives that can be viewed in the world. So why rehash it again? But of course, always having that fresh, more recent perspective to be able to give examples that are connected to today. But then with creativity, the thing, and hopefully what my book will bring is that other level of honesty about creativity. Because, and this kind of gets to the heart of the book, is that I've always kind of felt, and this is what we're taught in our culture, is that creativity is fun. It's enjoyable. It's about, oh, wow, we're going to get creative at work today. Well, let's get the toys out. Let's get the things out that are going to make us, kind of playful and free flowing. And that's always the angle that we come in with creativity. But what I've kept finding, and I only experienced this once I essentially hit a real creative low. I was just in this place in my life where I was just flat out depressed. I was just struggling, and every idea I came up with just seemed like garbage. And I was just really in this kind of that dark place where you're like, what am I doing? How am I going to make this my living? How am I going to keep doing, things that are creative, whether it's art or just making things? And it was in that moment where I just had this realization that, we've just been looking at creativity all wrong as a culture. And that, yes, there is the aspect that is fun. Absolutely. The thing that we tell ourselves is true, that creativity is fun. But like any other massive challenge in life, any other thing you're going to try to pour yourself into, it really sucks at times. It gets really, really hard. And this is the part of creativity I think just doesn't get talked about, where, with sports, when you're a kid, people tell you, no pain, no gain. When the going gets tough, the tough get going, right? We have these amazing phrases, but in our class, what is it? It's about self-exploration. It's about ideas. It's, and I'm generalizing here, of course, but it's, it's much more about, puppies and cotton candy. It's about fun and enjoyment and being your own person. Whereas the thing that I feel like we really need to learn about creativity is that it is hard. Like everything else in life, there are times where when you have thought about the same thing over and over, when a painter has been painting in the same style that is their own style, that is their own unique perspective on the world from their own hands, and yet they have to, reimagine a portrait over and over, a physical form, a landscape. They have to keep coming at it with a new perspective every single time. And that gets hard. There's going to be times when creativity honestly really does suck. And I think knowing that, kind of like with sports, when
is that the title of your book? Creativity really does suck.
Time will tell, but man, it sure feels like it, right?
The hard work and drudgery of creativity by Phil Hansen. Don't you want to buy it?
Yeah, exactly. That's a great subtitle right there.
Yeah, there you go.
And but it is that perspective that all of a sudden, when you're in sports and you know that it is going to be hard, well, what do? You push through.
Yeah.
Well, if all we're taught with creativity is that it's going to be easy, when it becomes a struggle, what do? Well, then we get sad. We feel like we're doing it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
We feel like, wait,
People give up.
I must.
Yeah.
Yeah, I must not be inspired because I'm not coming up with ideas, as opposed to, oh, it's hard. Now is my time to hunker down, to really grit my teeth, to push through this, to get to the other side. And that is where just beautiful things happen. That's where people come up with amazing ideas because they've been in it. They've really spent the time in it. And that's, I think with creativity, that's the thing that we're just missing in the conversation. Because, it happens to me all the time, is that people, they'll chat with me about my art, and, my art looks really fun and enjoyable, and it is. But there are these times where I'm struggling. And yet when people talk with me about my art, the main thing they talk about is, wow, you must have so much fun. And it's like, well, yeah, but there's times that it's really a pain in the butt and it's not working, or, I spent a lot of money on something and it's not going according to plan, or there was a commercial I did for Arby's and it was supposed to be a 2-day shoot, but the 2 days turned into a bunch of production issues. And all of a sudden we had 2.5 hours. And all of a sudden, this video, which looks fun and playful, is actually the most stressful art I've ever made in my life.
Yeah.
It worked out.
But it was still hard.
But yeah, that experience. Yeah. So, I totally lost track of your question. But yes, creativity can be hard.
We're good. We're all in the same. We're in the ballpark, so it's okay. For our listeners who haven't seen your art, I would 100% go watch his TED Talk, go to his website, and just check it out, because it's the thing for me. And I'm not an artistic person as far as like drawing and things like that, but like I'm so curious, like how you see things and you're like, oh, this could be that. So specifically referencing the Starbucks cups, stuff like that. And then the karate chopping, the painting that turns into Bruce Lee. Like, how does your mind like just visualize that? And then the follow-up question to that is, how do you take that process and distill it down into Joe Everyman, who's sitting in one of your keynote speeches, who works for a CPA firm? That's like, what's the connection there? As far as creativity and things like that, it's like, what lesson would that have for that person there? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So
loaded. Yeah, big question. But
it is big, but at the same time, for me with creativity, I've always approached, and I only realized this later, kind of meeting other artists, is that there's really kind of two approaches that artists tend to have, and these are kind of, I'm going to talk about them in very opposite spectrums, but there's of course a very wide range. So there's the one approach, and this is the one that we always talk about, is that the people who work intuitively, they kind of sit down at the canvas and they have paints and they have no idea what they're going to paint, and they start to paint, and all of a sudden it's turning into this thing, and then on and on and on, and all of a sudden they have this painting that they never started to even think about or plan with. And then the other side of it is the people who go in extremely analytical. They're planning out everything to the absolute degree. They already know where they're going. And maybe they started with one sketch. Maybe from that one sketch, they had 10 other sketches, which led to then the final plan for the painting. And then from that plan, they recreate the painting almost exactly from that plan. So there's two very different sides to art and creativity. And I tend to fall much more towards the analytical side. My dad was an engineer, so I feel like I kind of come to that planning side a bunch more, that's a very odd phrase, more naturally, to be able to kind of just be willing to very much sit down and plan out what I'm going to do, how I'm going to get there, and then execute it. Yeah. So basically, once I get to the place of actually making the art, believe it or not, the creativity in my mind is done, because the creative thought that went into it has already been thought about. Everything's been figured out, analyzed, and planned. So once I actually start creating the picture, now I'm working. I'm the worker bee at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And I think so then that kind of answers the first part of your question. Then the second part is, how does that connect to everybody in the room? Well, I think that's how, is, to really just, kind of breaking down this process and talking about how creativity, although we talk about it as this kind of almost mystical thing in our culture, it's the lone genius going off and thinking late into the night. And although there are those people, the majority of artists are planning ahead. They very much, have a method of working. They have an approach to it, and they kind of work their way into it. And then going back to kind of the materials that you start talking about is Starbucks cups and, karate chops. And right now in the fridge in the studio here, I have 750 worms. And so kind of where do these materials...
I've got worms in my refrigerator. Andrew, you got worms. Andrew's got worms in his refrigerator too. That's normal. Totally normal.
And this morning I came in the studio and the worms had gotten out of the box and they had pushed their way through the door partially. And so there were worms on the floor crawling away from the fridge. And when I opened the fridge, probably about 50 or 60 worms fell out because they had broken free, which I'm very, I feel for them that they feel trapped in this box, which they should, right?
I love it how your art studio doubles as the scene of a horror film.
It really does. Yeah, there's been discussion of, we should get a picture of you covered with worms. And I'm like, I don't think there should be that picture.
There are just some ideas that don't need to happen.
Yeah, but hey, we got to explore, right?
Yes.
So for me to be able to kind of break down the creative process and show that it is analytical, and then of course, kind of coming back to the materials, the part that seems really strange on my end is, I took a guitar and I smashed it apart. I use handwritten text to create pictures. I use all these things. And although it looks weird, if you go way back to kind of where all of this style of art started, is it comes from the very simple idea of what is the small thing or the everyday thing that's in front of me that I can take and use over and over and over, just repeat this object over and over and over, and can I make art from it? And initially that might sound like, okay, well, that's fine for you, but not for me kind of thing. But I have this approach that if I can find two shades within a material, I can make art. And it almost becomes problematic because with that approach, you instantly see that everything can be used to make art. A beautiful guitar, well, it might, be painted a certain color, but there's the guitar strings, there's metal versus painted wood. And if you take the guitar and smash it, well, then you're going to get to the interior shade of the wood. So all of a sudden you have multiple shades within this one product that can be used. Or, with worms, I think is a great example of two shades where if I put them on a white surface, so let's just say you make a pile of worms, well, then you have the darkness of the worms versus the white of the surface of the whatever they're on, in this case, the floor. But there you go. You have two shades. You're using the worms to make a solid shade dark and then the whiteness of the floor to be the white. And so then that's the approach. And once you start to approach things that way, you start to see that, art is literally, I don't want to sound cheesy or cliche, but it's literally everywhere. Any material can be used.
Art is everywhere. You just got to have the eyes to see it. I love it.
Yeah. And then that, of course, connects back to work because what do we need to do? We, kind of going back to this idea again of you got to take what's in front of you and reimagine it over and over and over. And that's really the artist's job. And again, that is something that actually, for a lot of artists, actually gets kind of boring. They're like, but I've already done that. I've already thought about that. I've already done this, 10 different ways, but yeah, you got to do it again and you got to do it again and again and again. And hopefully you can find that enjoyment, that entertainment of looking for that nuanced difference within the challenge you're facing, because one, it keeps it entertaining, but two, they know that's what's going to lead you down the road to staying with it, to just continue to come up with ideas for your whole life. So that's ultimately, that's kind of the game with creativity, is just stay in it. Yeah.
The gamification of creativity. I think it's interesting because I think the two things you said, or I guess probably the three things you said, number one about challenging the notion that creativity is always fun and spontaneous and puppies and cotton candy and s'mores, and that it's, it's not that. I think that makes it more accessible to people because I think a lot of times people don't have those feelings when they're creating and they're like, I can't create because I'm not having those feelings. I think the second thing too is just realizing that so much of it is how you view things. how you see things in front of you. And if you just look at something in a little bit different light, you could see something that's not there already. And that is hugely beneficial in a number of ways.
And I don't want to kind of put it back on everybody else, and I don't want to demystify it too much, because the mystification, that's a weird word, but demystifying sounds appropriate. But it isn't magic, it's work.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, every artist who's creating stuff beyond like one fun, simple project, like once you start to do it over and over and you've done it for years, it is work. And there is the mystifying elements that artists like to hold on to. But to be able to show up and be creative every day literally takes effort. And that's just really important to know, that it's not, as you said, s'mores.
Like, you can't tell me that painting the Sistine Chapel didn't get a little hard sometimes. I mean, come on now, right?
Literally backbreaking. Didn't he? We'd have to go back and do a little research. But like literally he was just breaking himself to create that. And he had a whole team too. That's the other thing, is that we often forget that, that we credit many works and many artworks and many things to a single person, but there was often whole crews involved in these things.
Yeah. Awesome. All right, Phil, it's time for our highest rated section of our show. And it's time to play 3 random questions. Since you're an artist, we're going to have 3 random questions about the Louvre in Paris. All right. So here's the deal. I'm going to ask you 3 random questions.
The Louvre. I can talk about the Louvre all day.
Louvre. The Louvre. There's a V in there. I'm probably totally butchering it, so I'm sorry. But anyways, that's how Wikipedia told me to say it. So, all right. If you get something right, if you get an answer right, you'll hear a ding. If you get it wrong, you hear a buzz. All right. If you get a ding, you feel good about yourself. If you get a buzz, you feel bad about yourself. That's how this game works. And Andrew just looks at you shamefully if you get all 3 wrong. So anyways, all right, here we roll. First question, question number 1. This is a multiple choice question. I will read the choices twice. What French monarch started building the art museum that we know as the Louvre today? Was it A, Francis I, B, Louis XIII, C, Louis XV, or D, Napoleon? A, Francis I, B, Louis XIII, C, Louis XV, or D, Napoleon?
I love it. This, other than Napoleon and some other random combinations of names and numbers, these are all brand new to me.
That's why it's multiple choice.
Let me throw a little pause in here and just say that one of the things that artists aren't great at is researching other artists, and that's for art historians. And most of us, once we become artists, it's like, I feel like most artists even stop looking at a lot of art because you love creating. So you're just out there making stuff.
Right.
So let's see. I'm going to have to flip a coin. Okay. So A, B, C, D. Was there even an E? See, it's already too many for me.
No, A, B, C, D.
So I'm going to flip a coin and go C or D. And I'm going to flip a coin again and go C.
Louis XV, final answer?
Final answer.
Sorry.
The odds were not in my favor, yes.
It was Francis I. So little known, probably this isn't a known fact, but Andrew didn't know this. So it actually was built in 1169 as a fortress.
No way.
Yeah. And then Francis
as a fortress.
As a fortress. Yeah, as a military fortress. And then in 1459, Francis I turned into a royal palace. And then, and then since then, monarchs have added on to it to what it is today. So there you go.
That's beautiful. That's a nice little fun fact. Thank you.
There you go.
One more. 2 more.
No, you're not off the hook yet, my friend. You've got 2 more. All right. Question number 2, and this is not multiple choice. This is a guess. Within $10 million US, how much is the Mona Lisa said to be worth in 2018? Within $10 million, how much is the Mona Lisa said to be worth in 2018?
10 million, within 10 million, because I feel like even 10, so there's living artists that have sold for, I don't know if they've quite, I'd have to go back and check, but broken 100 million for a living artist.
Sorry,
which is,
let me say, so it's well over $100 million. I'm saying
no, exactly. I'm just trying to rationalize my way to some number that doesn't even exist because there's only one, right? So then, let's see. So I'm just trying to rationalize my way to an extravagant number and still try to be within 100. Or within 10 million? I'm going to go within 100 million. I'm going to change the rules on it.
Phil, again, my podcast, my rules, okay?
Let's say, oh boy, art just gets silly at a certain point. Let's go 472 million. Oh!
Not even in the ballpark. Listen to this, Andrew. You ready for this?
Isn't that amazing?
830 million.
Wow.
830 million. That's amazing. That's absolutely amazing.
Huh.
Okay, question number 3. I've got faith that you can get this, Phil. I've got faith in you for this one. Okay. Multiple choice again. In square feet, how big is the Louvre? In square feet.
Never been there. Okay. All right. Multiple choice.
A, 652,300 square feet. B, 748,000 square feet. C, 541,000 square feet. Or D, 613,000 square feet.
They all sound too big. So I'm going to go with 500 and change.
Sorry. 652,300 square feet is how big it is.
Wow.
It's like the size of Andrew's guest house. Like, that's how big it is.
I'm like, I feel pretty amazed. My studio is 2,500 square feet. And I can't even imagine. I'm like trying to even do the math on how many multiples that is. I can't even get there.
Yeah, it's crazy.
That's impressive.
I wonder how many days it takes like a normal person to go through the whole Louvre. I should have looked that up.
Whole Louvre. That's actually a great question.
Yeah, I let my listeners down. I did not research that at all. So,
just a physical walking without even stopping to look.
Yeah.
To enter every room, how long would that take? Full speed walking.
A while. I guess that's how. That's why they stayed open, because you have to keep buying tickets to come back and see more of it. Anyway, oh man, Phil, hey, thanks so much for being on with us today, man. It was awesome and fascinating. Your content's fascinating. You work with worms and make it beautiful. So obviously you've got a gift, but listen, thanks so much. Thanks for being such a good partner, ESB. Big shout out to all our friends at Eagles Talent and Sheldon Sinek, who's president of my fan club. And Phil, look forward to hearing about the book coming out. And yeah, man, good luck on the road, and we'll chat with you soon.
Hey, thank you. More than a pleasure. Talk to you again sometime.
All right, cool, Phil. Take care. Hey everyone, thanks so much for listening today. Big thank you to Phil Hansen for being on the show. To learn more about Phil, go to our website, www.executivespeakers.com. Search Phil Hansen. You can get bio, videos, as well as speech topics. As always, thank you to my producer, Andrew. We will look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.